Call this meeting to order of the Borough Assembly Special Session. And it's time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. You'll all stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We've called this meeting to discuss, review and discuss the 2013 Revenue Requirement Study. In November of 2013, D. Hiddle and Associates Incorporated provided the borough with an electrical revenue requirement study. The study was in response to the requirements as set forth in the borough's July 2012 request for proposals. The study recommends an electrical rate increase of approximately 2% and encourages that consumption rate blocks be adjusted. And I asked Joe if he would give a little bit of a review of the D. Hiddle report so that folks who were not familiar with it had some background.
Right, I think it might be good to go back to about 1985, thereabouts, when we first were connected up to the four-dam pool, which is now the SEPA system on the Tyee project, and became 100% hydro-based. Four-dam pools hydro plus our Crystal Lake hydro made us 100% hydro-based. At that time, the rates were put into place. Of course, the rates went down because we were less dependent on the diesel plant. And so the rates were set, and they were set in such a way that the Electric Enterprise Fund would be healthy, that it would generate reserves against things that we cannot insure for, that we have to have money in the bank for. And also at that time, the city fathers wanted to get the old diesel plant across the street off of that corner, moved out the road, and so they began to bank away money to do that. When I came on the scene in 2003, well, up until that time, rates were basically flat all the way through that. When I came on the scene in 2003, my marching orders were to get the diesel plant moved out the road. Prior to that, the property had been purchased at Scow Bay. The property had been developed in the sense it was leveled. And the city at that time had spent roughly $1 million on that Scow Bay property. Between the purchase price and the improvements, we had spent about $1 million in preparation of moving our facilities out there. The city manager at that time asked me to put together the project to get us moved, which I did. We got to the 30% design phase and discovered it was going to cost about $20 million to do that, to get us completely off this corner and also increase our generation by 20%, because there was a study done in 1995 that showed that we were generation deficient with our diesel plant. In other words, we didn't have enough diesel plant to handle our load. At that time, it was a summertime peak, not a wintertime peak. It was the canneries that were driving the bus at that time. At any rate, the other thing that I noticed right away is that the reports, the annual reports, showed that the Power and Light was beginning to lose money. We were beginning to have more expenses than we had revenues, and because the rates hadn't changed in so many years, why it was prudent then to do a study. And so we did in 2005. We did a revenue projection study, which also included a cost of service component. Now, by way of explanation, revenue projection study basically looks at where you are today, looks ahead about 5 years, looks at your expenses, your capital projects, and all the rest of that, and determines how much revenue do you have to have coming in order to meet those goals. Cost of service study on the other side looks at the various rate classes: harbor, residential, street lighting and all the rest, and allocates the plant to those rate classes to make sure that there's no subsidization of any from one rate class to another. In other words, each rate class is paying their fair share. So that's what a cost of service study does, which is part of a revenue projection study. So at that time, it did show that the rates were pretty fair. There did need to be an increase across the board. The only rate class that was getting some subsidy was the harbor. And that's, in the industry, that's not unusual. One utility I was with in Montana was predominantly agriculture. And so the one rate class that got a subsidy was the irrigators. So that's not unusual. At any rate, that rate study indicated that we should have a rate increase of about 12%. And so we went through the process and did that. And in 2006, we, for the first time since way back when, we got a rate increase of 12%. The following year, the city council decided that that was a mistake, and so they basically backtracked and made a 6% downward adjustment. So the last rate adjustment we had was in 2007, 6 or 7, and that was a 6% downward correction. So since about 1985, over all those years, our net increase has been about 6%. So today, I did want to cover what an enterprise fund is. An enterprise fund is a organization that has a product to sell, and the organization then has to live on what it sells. In other words, we live on our revenues. So as an enterprise fund, our books are kept separately from the general fund or any other fund, and we have to live on our revenues. We're not supposed to make a profit, but we are supposed to have an adequate reserve to cover eventualities, things that can't be insured. We provide a product that is critical to the community, and so we have to be we have to keep that in mind as we look at what we're doing. Let's pause a minute and see if there's any questions on what I've said so far.
There was
Yes.
one thing that you said. You said the four-dam pool switch happened in 1995?
85.
85. Okay, that clears up my question.
My dates might be off 6 months or.
Well, no, you said
whatever,
1985
yeah.
later, and so
Yeah.
I wasn't tracking on that. That's perfect.
So that kind of brings us, the other thing we should mention is that over that time, we have, say, since 1980, mid-80s, we sell approximately twice the amount of energy that we sold then. And we do that with the same staff. Our staffing requirements hasn't changed, or we've held the staff to that. And in fact, this year, in our budget this year, we're actually one FTE, one person down, because we have not replaced the line foreman who retired. We haven't filled in behind him. So we're actually down one person this year in our budget. We have also proposed to take our 32-hour-a-week position at the front desk and move it back to a 40-hour. That's also in the budget. So did anybody get a look at our org chart? I think some people picked it up.
Okay, I'm writing my notes on it. Sure.
Thanks.
I do have one left over here. But as you can see, there's 11 employees there. A lot of us wear multiple hats, but basically the same size we've been for many, many years.
If I may, Joe, just
Yes.
jump in. The other thing his group did, and I'm not sure I could say willingly, but they voted for it, but they took a fairly substantial hit on their benefits package in the latest IBEW contract and agreed to that, understanding the nature of what we went through. So it's not like this group hasn't tried to contribute to getting this budget in better shape.
So bottom line is that Power and Light is a healthy operation financially. We have highly trained staff. I think we provide a quality product, and we do that at a very reasonable rate. We have very low turnover, so I think just in general you have a department here in the city that is very healthy. I think that any dramatic change at this point would be counterproductive. Let's see, I was gonna, maybe we should touch on the reserve balance and what that should be before we move into, I'd like to address Bob's questions.
Sure.
The consultant that did our revenue projection study also, as part of his scope of work, looked at what the bottom or what the least amount of reserve we should have. And this is based on basically three things. It's based on 60 days operating expenses. It's based on the largest single disaster that we could have, in this case, this large transformer over here at the plant. If that should fail, what would that cost to replace? But the biggest ticket item is if we should lose our feed from Tyee and put us on diesel. That these submarine cables, if we have a disaster there and the submarine cables become compromised and they can't deliver the power over here to this island, we're going to be on diesel generation. And that could be months of diesel generation, and that's expensive. And so taking all those things into consideration, and given the fact that you don't just stack them up, but you have to have, some reasonable assurance they're not all going to have it at the same time, that figure that he came up with is $4 million. In our rate study in 2005, that figure was $2.5 million. So, and that, if you look at the other costs involved since 2005 to today, it's kind of in line. So our present reserve balance is mid 5 million, 5.5 to 6 million in there somewhere. And our minimum should be 4. And I agree with what the consultant is telling us. So anyway, in this study,
Joe, can I ask a quick
Yes.
question before you move on? On that cable, if something happened to that cable, does that come out of in your budget, or is that from SEPA, or how's that handled?
that's an excellent question. One of the things that SEPA does, even though SEPA is made up of the communities of Wrangell, Petersburg, Ketchikan, it is a separate entity, and it protects us from those very things. And so if there's a catastrophic failure, if that's a submarine cable, if it's an avalanche, landslide, whatever, we're protected from that. The community is protected. And SEPA does keep a large reserve fund itself. The bottom there is 10 million. But right now it's more like cash and reserves are closer to 20 million. SEPA is healthy also.
Thank you.
At any rate, the scope of work for the study, the revenue projection study, was fairly small, fairly concise, and there's a number of reasons for that. There were some specific things that I wanted to accomplish. I've been in the business for 40 years, and so there's a lot of things that I know that I don't have to hire a consultant to do. So there were three main things that I wanted the consultant to do. Number one, I wanted him to look at just the overall increase that we might need going down the road, the projection for 5 years. The second thing we needed to do is that we needed to flatten our rates. Right now we have a declining block rate, which encourages usage. The more you use, the cheaper it gets. This made good sense in 1980s, 1990s. It does not make good sense today. So the second goal then was to flatten the rates out, make them a little flatter. The third goal was that we've historically had this big jump between a small commercial and a large commercial. And the dividing line is the amount of energy that you use. Once you exceed a 50 kilowatt demand, you become a large commercial. And if you bump over that, if you're a business like Tonka Seafoods down here was on Singley Alley, and you bumped over that, all of a sudden your bills went up dramatically. So there was this jump between those two rate classes. And so we wanted to smooth that out. And that's been really difficult to do. It took a lot of back and forth. That was a single one thing that caused this rate study to go on and on and on, much longer than it should have. But at any rate, we pretty much accomplished those three goals in the study. Things we did not look at, we did not look at changing our demand. Our demand is not widely understood. Our demand charge for large commercial customers is not widely understood. Somewhat difficult to explain, but basically it's a capacity charge that we charge large customers so that when they go over and flip the switch on their operation, everything runs. So we have adequate line capacity, we have adequate transformers, we have adequate distribution system to serve that. And so they're tying up a large portion of our system, and we charge them for that. So maybe at this time it would be good to look at one of the questions that Bob had is how do we stand compared to our neighbors? Where are we at compared to our neighbors? And I did this.
I wanted to ask one question at first. When you talked about the jump between the small and large commercial, was the issue with it within the study, or was this being presented to commercial entities and they were having some heartburn with what was being discussed?
No, it was pretty much an internal thing. We had very long and lengthy discussions, sometimes heated discussions with certain individuals. I bring up Tonka Seafoods as an example, because when they bumped over that line, their bills went way up. Okay. And so they'd come in the office and say, hey, we're going to reduce our demand, we're going to get down below that. And so it was a point of contention. Okay. But generally speaking, our rates are reasonable enough across the board that we don't get a lot of complaints that way. But anyway, this sheet that I passed out shows some rate comparisons for the residential and the harbor between ourselves, Sitka, Ketchikan, Wrangell. AEL&P is Juneau. They serve Juneau, and AP&T serves Haines. Okay, the two bottom ones, AEL&P and AP&T, those are for-profit. The others are publics or munis. So you can see that by and large, for larger consumptions, we are the best in Southeast. We are the lowest. Making a 2% adjustment in that is not going to change this picture. The other thing I'd like for us to look at is that, okay, what about, well, our biggest rate class is residential, and the next biggest is large commercial, which is basically our canneries. And so we want to make darn sure that our rates are also in line with the rest of the surrounding area so that we don't lose customers. So I did a little comparison here, again, between Southeast communities and ourselves, and you can see that in Petersburg, now this is I've got a PFI bill, typical summer month. It's actually one of the probably the highest summer months. So last August, I think it was, their bill was $159,000, almost $160,000 for that month. Had they been in Wrangell, it would have been almost $190,000. In Juneau has a nice summertime rate because of They're large hydro projects. When they have lots of water, they try to sell a lot of energy in the summertime. And so they're down comparable to us. Sitka, again, would have been almost 190,000 for that same. And Sitka, of course, is facing some serious rate increases with the underfunding of their Blue Lake project. They're going to see some significant increases over there. And then finally in Haines, almost 188,000. So again, we can adjust our rates 2%. Nobody's going to leave us. We've got a good product at a reasonable price.
Can I go back to your chart that you're showing where the comparisons are? When I read and reread the study, the harbor was separated out from the residential.
Yes.
What was the original rationale for that? For having two different rates?
Residential is exactly that. It's where somebody lives. Okay? Anything else has to be a different rate. The residences typically have one transformer that serves 5 or 6 houses.
Yeah.
A commercial does not. They have their own transformer. Harbor is a completely different animal, and so I think there's good rationale for having a separate rate for the harbor. Everybody, there is one that does not. I think it was Haines that does not have a special harbor rate. They just are under their small commercial rate.
Okay.
And if we put the harbor under small commercial, it wouldn't really change their cost significantly if you had a boat down there. Whether you're under the harbor rate or small commercial, it wouldn't be that big of a difference.
And I think Haynes is on diesel all winter, isn't it? Isn't
A lot
that
of-
the reason that their rates
They
are
do
so
have
high?
some hydro, but they have a lot of diesel, yeah.
Right.
We are fortunate, maybe I should mention that, we are very fortunate that the Petersburg City Fathers from the 1920s started thinking hydro, and their goal was to get Petersburg and the area on 100% hydro. They reached that goal, and we're reaping the benefits of that today. I wanted to go back to the large commercial if I could. There's been some discussion about the basic customer charge, the demand charge, and then the energy charge. And if you look down the list there, let's just look at demand charge. Petersburg, $3.10 a kilowatt. Wrangell, no demand charge, 0. AEL&P, $14.30. Sitka, $5.10. And AT&T up at Haines, $6.03. So you can see that's all over the map. And when you're doing rate design, you need to get a certain amount of revenue. And how you get that revenue is kind of up to you. Do you want to get it in a demand charge, or do you want to get it in an energy charge? So Wrangell, for instance, no demand charge, but yet their cost to PFI is higher than we are. So again, for the purposes of this study, I wanted to do those three main things that we talked about. I did not want to mess with the demand charge because it's kind of a hot button with PFI. And I think there's enough hot buttons here. Anytime you touch electric rates, it's a lightning rod, it's a hot button. So I wanted to keep the number of those to a minimum. Questions on that?
Just more of a statement. Joe's right. I mean, our demand charge is reasonable is a good way to talk about it. I mean, even down south, you'll see demand charges much higher than that.
And I do think it's prudent to have a demand charge because you're sending a signal to that customer that if you keep your demand down, we can give you a better rate. And so there's things that they can do, especially in an industrial plant, the way they operate, the way they bring their load up, that they can keep their demand down. And so I think it's good to send them a signal. Okay, so Bob's questions, we answered the first one about the reserve balance.
Joe, on that reserve
Yes.
balance, I had another thought. are there any, I've seen, looking at your budget and everything, I don't see any big projects coming up on the horizon that you need to start, developing money for or putting it in a reserve. Am I reading this correctly?
That's correct, in the near term.
Right.
By near term, I mean the next 5 years.
Yes.
We're not anticipating any large projects. After that, beyond that horizon, one of the things we're going to be looking at is a complete rewind of our 50, 60-year-old generator out at Blind Slough. That's going to be significant.
So, to recap then, so the $4 million reserve is sufficient in your mind for the next 4 or 5 years?
Yes.
Okay.
If I may, and this is Joe's probably right, so you can pretty much ignore me, but my concern about that is, we live in a fairly wet climate. Because our staffing level is what it is, we don't really have a pole replacement system where we're out there replacing 25, 30 poles a year. Joe would be hit really hard if his staff had to start doing something like that. And, so you're looking at, if we had something happen, you're almost forced to hire contractors or, use other munis that might have extra staff and pay their way to come over here to help him out. Joe's talking about the Crystal Lake stuff, and I trust him implicitly. I mean, making sure, when he talked about the 3 main drivers behind that fund balance, you didn't hear that Crystal Lake thing. So that's another one of those potentially big ticket items that we don't want that to go down. Talk about an impact on your rates, is if that facility was suddenly offline.
So you're thinking, Steve, then, is it should be higher?
I don't know. I mean, that's my problem. I mean, I trust Joe. I mean, he thinks this $4 million is fine, but I'm concerned about it, just from the standpoint of some of those other issues. But
Yeah, let me respond to that a little bit. Steve's correct. It depends a lot on what your plans are for the future. If we're, like we were in the past, if we were, let's say we wanted to move our headquarters building out the road. Okay, at one time, back when Mr. Hahn was here, when was that, Kathy?
2.5, well, I've been here 2.5 years, so.
Yeah, at any rate, in our budget, in our approved budget, there was $2 million in there to purchase the Reed building out there. And then Mr. Hahn and I went out to start negotiating that with the Reeds. And then he kind of got cold feet and decided, maybe we shouldn't do this. And maybe we should put it to the vote of the people. And anyway, the community changed directions. That did not, ceased to become a priority. And so if you look at your capital list now that you're going out and asking money, there's nothing in there for power and light.
If I may add to that, we're talking about a police station building as being the #1 priority and a building that's in really bad shape. Right after that, if you look at buildings, it's power and light / public works, and we can let Carl and Joe argue among themselves which building's in worse shape. But
yeah, mine is the oldest and has no insulation. Carl's is about to slip into the slough.
So that means, again, there's another one of those kind of things sitting there that, as we've seen from what building costs are, how expensive it is to replace these buildings. And back to the fund balance, we're not taking that into account much right now.
If the vision is to clean up that corner so people can see around it, just the building that's right on the corner, not the rest of the plant, but just the building on the corner. If that's the long-term vision, then because we're an enterprise fund, we should begin to build that war chest. So, but in the present rates, the first 5 years, we're not building that war chest. Bob asked about the what rate the equipment should be depreciated. The depreciation schedule is given to us by Jody. We have basically a $20 million plant out there that we depreciate. And, you know, again, it's kind of like rate making. The depreciation is kind of all over the map. But Steve's formula for how healthy our department is and for budgeting purposes requires a certain amount of depreciation. And right now, we are not meeting that. We are deficient by a couple $100,000. The two rate increases that we're talking about, a 2% and a 2% the following year, the first 2% would half the amount that we're deficient in the formula, and then the following year we would be in the black again, according to Steve's formula. Says there are estimates and comparisons done by the contractor in the study using different years' data. Yeah, because the study went on, we ended up with some older data. The data from that year compared to the subsequent year was not dramatically different, and so it didn't change the results. And we kind of went at it backwards to check the results that the contractor did, and Sue did a quick estimate, and she shows exactly that the 2% does what we need to do in 2 years. And so we kind of confirmed that.
Joe, or
Yes.
Cindy, may I ask a question? Sue, when you did that, did you include any kind of inflationary number on power and lights expenses?
It was just a little work using this year's budget, you know, no changes.
Okay, yeah.
We didn't see any in the next couple of years, so we just went with a straight, you know, what will this get us?
Bring it up because, you know, Joe's department is similar to everything else in our world. You have increases in wages. We don't have much going on there, but health insurance is something that in some cases falls out of our control. And the bigger issue for Joe is things like fuel, cost of equipment, you know, copper wire, things that can go really high. You know, so inflationary adjustments when it comes to that kind of stuff can actually sometimes hammer that. So, you know, Joe's 2% gets us halfway there, another 2%, there's no guarantee. So we're clear that second 2% doesn't still have you below if he ends up, you know, price of copper goes sky high again, or health insurance changes dramatically and we can't change the union contract in the meantime.
Yeah, along with that issue, and we don't know where it's going to go yet until the legislature ends, but is the 2% of PRS included in that?
No.
No, so that's still, that could be a
That's a wild card.
Yeah.
Correct. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
Is the depreciation schedule, you said 20 years to depreciate the equipment there, your big piece?
No, I said we had over $20 million of plant.
Okay, so, but the depreciation, let me turn that question around a little bit differently. The depreciation then, that we're looking at then, or what we're estimating it should be, that you're comfortable with that, if we had the money to do it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
One of the
It's kind of a mixed bag because your hydro plant, for instance, those things last for 100 years. Our poles, about 40. Some of them less when the top's rot out of them. Our generation equipment, that may only be 20 years. So it's kind of a mixed bag.
Right, understood.
So, yeah.
I guess the only other question I was going to ask is, so for the time being, you've abandoned moving this building?
I can kind of speak to that. When I got here, that was still, I had a couple of us city council members they wanted me to pursue. Talked to Joe, got the background. We got a ruling from the attorney that, in fact, yes, it would have to go to the voters. We were in the middle of the borough fight, and concept was, you know what, this is probably not a really good time to try to go ask the voters, do you want to, do this? Then it became very obvious that the majority of the city council was not in favor of buying the Reed property and moving out the road. So we dropped the project based on city council direction. I can't speak for your council today. I don't know, but I've not been asked to put it back on a capital project list or make it something that we're trying to do.
And if we did abandon that building, would we sell that property or would the borough retain it?
I don't know.
Because I'm thinking that there'd be some hazmat cleanup.
Well, there's different ways to approach moving Joe's operation, and I would definitely leave that up to Joe's expertise, but so I'm going to throw things out here that he may jump in and tell me I'm don't know what the hell I'm talking about. You could approach it from the standpoint of moving one generator at a time as they wear out, but that splits his staff and causes a big, huge problem. In other words, you could move the office,
Right.
but not move the generator building, but now you got some command and control issues that could become difficult for him. You could move it all at once. That's where your 20, 25, knowing construction costs and this kind of stuff, the $20 million estimate could easily turn into 30 without too many blinks. So you end up having to run one plant while you're building a new one. Gets kind of expensive. We have not put a tremendous amount of thought into that recently. Joe's probably got some background where we've talked about it before I got here, but it wouldn't be cheap.
Yeah, my thought was, more recently, when we did have it in the budget to buy the Reed building, that just the building on the corner, which is our headquarters and the crew center, that would move to Scow Bay. The generation plant itself, we would have to probably have the mechanic there most of the time, but actually we're split now because our line trucks, et cetera, are out at Scow Bay. And so we do have kind of a split operation. We would be more centralized if we had the Reed building. Then the only split off would be the mechanic. But that plant pretty much runs itself with our SCADA system. So, and then the idea for that corner was once the building was removed, and there might be some old fuel oil or something we'd have to take care of. There is some asbestos in the building. We'd have to deal with that. But my vision for that corner was something that would be more from the beautification of that. That's the main intersection in town. That's what everybody sees when they get off the plane and come down and hit town. That's what they see. Right now, we got an industrial plant.
Yeah, I mean, the two, if you wanted to go that route, the two big things that I'd ask a lot of questions about would be, it goes away, so yeah, you can put a nice turn lane in there, make it easier for trucks to make that corner. In other words, you widen the road. That's a DOT question that who knows what they would make us do, but Joe's point's one thing. The other is, and it was one of my big concerns about their operation moving out the road is the bulk of the customers are here. Joe continues to have some folks who need to go in and see him for various things. Now they're farther out. It's less accessible. He doesn't want to hear that. I have a really big conversation about how do we move the customer-facing stuff out of his operation into the municipal building so we could keep it more easily accessible to people. And there's a challenge to that. I mean, it's not easy to do and poses some changes. So we're not there at the moment. I mean, the assembly would have to decide that that's what they want to do, and then we could work through all the details. But for the moment, that's not in the plan, and that was by pretty much assembly direction, or city council direction at the time.
In this year's budget, there is money in there to do a design of changing the corner of the building. What I'd like to do is 45 that corner and build a new entrance to the building, which would mean modification of the stairway and moving the door back on a 45, and then potentially glassing in that so that when people come up, drive up to that corner, they can see around the corner, which you can't do now. Unless you get clear out into the pedestrian lane, you can't see around the corner.
And have there been any comments about that from emergency vehicles? I would think that would be an issue.
I think. I mean, honestly, everybody's just kind of used to it. It doesn't make it right. It just they've adjusted to it.
At any rate, there's some design money in the budget. You'll see the professional services is inflated compared to what it has been in recent years, and that's mainly to redesign the entrance to that building and also to insulate, doing an exterior insulation system.
And I would just, if folks on the assembly haven't taken a tour of the facility, it's pretty impressive. And also a lot of old equipment, but it's working quite well. And Sid gives a good tour of that facility, and it's amazing to see how much is computerized and what can be tracked online. Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, the next question that Bob had was that concerned the transfer of the funds to the Harbor Department, and I don't know that I can really speak to that. I fought that tooth and nail, but of course I lost. But so I can't really speak to how it might ever return to our coffers. Just not.
I can maybe speak to the thought process of the city council at the time, and that's about the extent of it. This is an issue that you can look at a lot of different ways, and I think it's kind of one opinion versus another. The North Harbor project was in jeopardy. They were trying to make sure, with its economic impact on the community, there's no question it was the most important project we had on the books. It needed to be done. And they didn't have the money. It's that simple. It's not inappropriate to do what the city council did, to take money out of an enterprise fund to pay for those improvements. Joe's group does get the revenue from it. On the other hand, Bob's question is very well taken. He's not getting additional revenue to pay for his loss of a fairly large chunk of his reserve fund. So, we're all one big operation, really, in the big picture. Yes, it's an enterprise fund, but it's the Borough of Petersburg, and does removing that money from Power and Light help the community? The answer is yes, in the sense of the harbor has a pretty large economic value to the community. I think that's where the city council was coming from. I don't think it's more complicated than that, but you're exactly right. You could adjust rates in the harbor to counteract for that, to rebuild the fund balance, but then it's back to that whole issue is what's the right number for the fund balance, and does it really need to be paid back if the fund balance is fine the way it is? So.
I was involved in that, and I think my thinking at the time was we had the potential of losing the North Harbor money if we didn't have everything together at the time. So basically we stole it from Joe.
Yeah.
Because we didn't have it in the, and this worries me till today. Our general fund balance isn't what it should be. So we couldn't take that. It's sort of like with the public safety building. The governor said, well, how much is Petersburg willing to kick in for this building? And we don't have it in the general fund, unless we play things with numbers. And, it wouldn't be fair to have Joe build the public safety building, would it, Joe? But, I mean, the thing is we need, to me, our general fund needs to have a much larger reserve, and I think the auditors have told us that over and over for things like this, because the state's not going to, we know it's not going to give us money anymore. So we have to build, we have to support ourselves. And that was the rationale for it at the time, was we either lose $9 million or we rob Joe.
Okay, the next question concerns the this was talking about the rate structure and changing it from a declining block to flat, or potentially you talked about a regressive rate, which would be an inverted block rate. And we did look at all of those scenarios. We did look at an inverted block rate. That's something that Sitka is going to be using because of their Blue Lake project. They're going to get very aggressive in discouraging big users. And it might be appropriate, I made myself a little note here, in a newspaper article this week about the potential rate increase. It said that for a residential customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, which is fairly average, that their rate increase would amount to 10 cents on their bill. Now, some people thought that was probably a misprint, but that's true. And the reason for that is that we have flattened the rates out, and so that the ones in the middle are staying pretty much where they're at, but the ones out here on the end, like me, with my house all electric, my bill would go up like $25. So was not a misprint. So yes, we did need to flatten the rates. I don't think we need to go inverted or regressive at this point. I think the demand and the usage has flattened. We had those years where everybody was converting from oil to electric, and so for about 3 or 4 years we were climbing dramatically, but for the last 2 years we've really flattened off. And lots of people are using heat pumps, which is a real blessing. Question number 6 concerns the commercial customers and the peak demand. I think we discussed that. Okay. Number 7, failures of the study to do rate comparisons. I think we've done that. Number 8, should SEBA change their policy so that communities know further ahead what and if rebates are forthcoming? What I've tried to do, sitting on the board, is to get away from rebates entirely. If we are in a position to give rebates, we're also in a position to lower the rate. Okay, so every year the board at SEPA sets the rate, the wholesale power rate for that year. You look backwards at what your performance was, you look ahead at what your oncoming projects are, and you set the rates accordingly. Well, for the first years that SEPA's been in existence, we have had to build our reserve. And so even though we knew that when we reorganized from Fort Ampoule to SEPA, that there was going to be significant savings, and we could have at that time lowered the wholesale power rate, we chose not to in order to build our funds, our reserves. Okay, we did that in the first 3 years. We thought it was going to take 5, but we did it in 3 years. And so all the pots are full now. And so for the last 2 years, I have really tried to get SEPA to lower the wholesale power rate so that we know it, so we can budget. We know what it's going to be and we can budget for it. But there is a political side of the thing that they like the rebates. You know, when the communities get hit with these couple $100,000 worth of rebates, they like that. And so I've been kind of a voice in the wilderness, so to speak. Nobody is. I've even made a motion to that effect on the board that we lower our rate a penny, drop it from 6.8 to 5.8, and did not pass.
So then does that rebate get rolled into our reserve? How does that get accommodated?
Basically, what it is, it's a reduction in the purchase power cost. Okay, every year we purchase power, resell it. What that amounts to is a lowering of the purchase power cost, and so it does go into our coffers. On the other hand, the council has said that because we get that back, we do not use our surcharge if we burn diesel. So we have in our rates a mechanism whereby if we burn a significant amount of diesel, we can put a surcharge on your electric bill. And so that protects the customers from that.
Yeah, so, John's statement about taking money from Joe, that's just kind of one of those nice examples. I mean, it doesn't get advertised much, but Joe's rebate has been used by the the Assembly, City Council, to avoid having to charge the public, it includes businesses, the diesel surcharge that we could by ordinance charge. And we have not done that last 3 years or longer.
3.
Yeah. We've used the rebate to offset that.
The other thing that it does is it allows you to do unusual one-time purchases. For instance, Parks and Rec discovered that they needed a cover for their pool.
Yeah.
Didn't have the money, roughly $50,000.
We used the rebate for that.
Rebate, they took $50,000 of the rebate and bought that pool cover.
The pool cover was $100,000 and paid for half.
Yeah.
The,
And again, the idea behind it lowering energy use, I mean, it has a connection, but it is.
Either way, though, we're going to get to the same point, as I see it. Either with a rebate or with reduced power.
Yes.
Kilowatt.
The difference is that with the lowering the rates, we can budget for that. I can't budget for a
Right, I
rebate.
understand that.
Okay.
Makes sense. Would it, and we'd have to collectively talk about it, but would it make a difference if the Assembly chose to write a letter to SEPA asking for that?
I think it would be prudent if you did. You know, I don't know if you were involved during the process of reorganizing from the Fort-Dam Pool to SEPA, but in those community outreach trips that we made and talking to the communities, we basically said that SEPA, when I say we, SEPA said that when we get the coffers full, you will see a rate decrease. That's basically what they said. Well, nobody's holding their feet to the fire over that. So does it make some sense to write a letter? Yeah, I think it does. It would help me because I've been trying to get that accomplished.
I know Mark has some concerns about this one, too.
Any other questions on that? We could get to the last question. Talks about energy conservation to slow the rate of electrical consumption. We have one program in place that is paying dividends, and that's our heat pump rebate program. And we have been processing rebates fairly actively for the past 6 months, and which is the first 6 months that we have had a rebate for air-to-air heat pumps, and that's been very, very effective. But that's really the only thing that we have done. Conservation measures are good. Sending price signals to people, that's good. And I think we're moving that way. We're flattening out the rates. We've got involved in heat pumps, very aggressively supported those. I have looked at lighting, trying to go to get away from the high pressure sodium lighting, and that's been less than successful. Wrangell did that with a grant, and they got some grant money from the state to convert their street lighting system, and they did that. Here, when the harbor did their design down there, we talked about that, and the design engineers went away from it and decided to stick with the yellow lights. And DOT, I tried to talk to them on Haugen out here that they need to re-illuminate Haugen, and they're not only not going to do that, they're sticking with the yellow lights too. So DOT is not moving that direction either. So, and it's kind of a mixed bag. They're an energy-saving fixture, but yet they're problematic in that they're seeing a lot of premature failures with them. So,
Technology not there yet.
not quite. It's getting there, and the price of them is coming down, and they're getting better. I think we could go with the area lights, our little dusk to dawn area lights, rather than street lighting. I think we could go to the LED on that, but then there are some folks that are not real happy with LED lighting because they're too bright, and the white light is. And we have that complaint all the time. We put in an area light for somebody, and then the neighbor comes in and says, "Hey, that's too bright. Can you paint one side of it black?" And we do that.
If the Assembly doesn't realize this, street lights and those security lights are one of the more controversial things. For every person who wants a new street light, there's another one who says, "I don't want it because I like it dark." It poses some serious customer service issues for Joe's group on a regular basis.
I got in some real trouble up on, is that King Street?
Kings Row.
Kings Row. Carl did a really nice job of rebuilding that road and everything, and so when we looked that over, I thought, wow, it's dark up here. We should put in some street lights. So I talked to city manager. He said, sure, yeah, put some up there. So we did, and boy, people started coming in the office. What are you doing? We actually ended up taking one of them down. So anyway, I've kind of covered what I was going to cover, and I'm ready for any and all questions.
Okay.
What we would like would be some direction from the Assembly in a formal fashion to either proceed with the rate increase, hold off another year, or whatever else. We'd like to finalize this budget, and that involves starting the rate ordinance piece if we're going to do that, because it does take 3 readings and then we still have the budget process to, that we're running up against a deadline as well. So
I'm going to ask for a 5-minute recess. I know Jason has to leave, and I need to take a quick break. So if we could just take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll jump back into our discussion. We've had you talk for the last hour, so you probably need a break
The
too.
one I'm getting hoarse.
So we are to the budget and rate discussion part of our meeting. And
If I could maybe
sure.
kind of summarize where we're at. We've basically presented where we are financially today. And there's two basic ways that we can proceed. One is with the recommended rate increases of a 2%, which we would put into the code and go through the 3 readings and all of that. The other one would be to purposely approve a deficit budget which does not meet Steve's formula, which draws our reserves down and basically kicks the can down the road for a few years, and potentially a couple of years down the road do another rate study, find out where we're at that point, and so that's kind of where we're at in the direction that we need to in finalizing the budget.
Very
Yes.
good, Jeff.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to increase the rates, the electrical rates, 2% this year and next year.
Second.
We have a first. John is recommending that we have a 2% rate increase, and Nancy is seconding. Is there any discussion?
Well, I think we should do it that way because we can kick the can down the road and then pay for another rate study and have a 4% raise, which won't go over well at all. I think we should ease into it now and save the cost of the future rate study. What do you think the best thing is, Joe?
I think the best thing is to keep a healthy department healthy, which means go ahead and do the rates now and not a bigger rate later, because we all recognize that touching electric rates is kind of a lightning rod. So even a 2%. So yeah, that's certainly my recommendation.
Yes.
And that's kind of why I was in favor of this also, is because our general fund, I don't think is healthy with the reserve it has. And with the things like, just in the last 2 weeks, we blew a transformer across the street from our house. A new one was there and ready to put in. It was really cold. Within an hour, they had that going, which I really appreciated. PFIs, that huge sucker you guys put in there when theirs left, they had another one to put in. And, you know, to me, the most important things we have going in this town are fishing and hydro. And because both attract business and keep business going. And if we keep those solvent and healthy, we can not only rob Joe at a later time again like we did for the harbor. We don't have any other place to go. If Joe gets in trouble or we have some problems, the general fund's, you know, at a dangerous minimum, you know, for their reserves. And we can't be doing that everywhere. The 2% raise this year and next year is so minuscule on individual budget and has such a dramatic impact on the whole town that I'd rather pay a little now than a lot later, or even risk not having the equipment available if things happen.
Did you have a question?
Oh, I just comment like John, I would agree with that. Also looking at the comparison that Joe did for us, comparing the various cities here in Southeast, I think what he's proposing is very reasonable here.
And that's what I see. It looks like even with the 2%, the rates are still pretty competitive with other communities. Are we ready for a vote? Can the clerk call the roll?
John,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
and Cindy.
Yes. The motion passes.
I moved to adjourn.
It's been moved that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second?
All right. It's been moved and seconded. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you all very much for your time.